The fluorescent lights of the Monroe County Courthouse hummed with an irritating persistence, casting harsh shadows across the beige walls of the witness preparation room. Emma Carter sat perfectly still in an oversized leather chair, her small legs dangling inches above the scuffed linoleum floor. In her lap, she clutched a stuffed rabbit, once white, now gray from countless nights of desperate embracing. The rabbit's left ear hung by a thread, and one of its button eyes had fallen off months ago, but to Emma, it was the only friend who understood her silence. Detective Sarah Mills watched the 3-year-old from across the room, her heart fracturing with each passing moment. 23 years on the force had shown her humanity's darkest corners, but nothing prepared her for the hollow emptiness in a child's eyes, eyes that had witnessed something no child should ever see. Sarah had 2 daughters of her own, both grown now, but she remembered when they were Emma's age. Full of questions, laughter, endless chatter about princesses and playground adventures. Emma hadn't spoken a single word in 6 months. "Emma, sweetheart," Sarah began, her voice deliberately soft as she knelt down to the child's eye level. The detective's knees protested. Too many years, too many cases, too many hours spent crouching beside broken victims. "I know it's scary. I know you don't want to remember that night, but your mommy needs your help. Can you tell me what happened? What did you see?" Nothing. Emma's blue eyes, so much like her mother's, stared straight through Sarah as if the detective were made of glass. The child's fingers tightened around the rabbit's worn body, but her expression remained frozen, locked behind walls of trauma that even the best therapists hadn't been able to penetrate. Patricia Carter, Emma's grandmother, sat in the corner of the room, her weathered hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. At 67 years old, Patricia had survived a husband's death, raised 3 children on a waitress's salary, and thought she'd seen every hardship life could offer. Then came that phone call 6 months ago, the one that shattered her world into a million irreparable pieces. Her daughter Jennifer, beaten within inches of her life. Her granddaughter found hiding in a closet, covered in her mother's blood, screaming until her voice simply stopped. "Please, baby girl," Patricia whispered, her voice cracking with exhaustion and desperation. "Grandma's here. You're safe now. The bad man can't hurt you here." Emma's only response was to squeeze the rabbit tighter. Outside the preparation room, Assistant District Attorney Robert Fitzgerald paced the hallway like a caged animal. His expensive Italian shoes clicked against the marble floor in a frantic rhythm that matched his racing thoughts. 48 hours. That's all he had left before Judge Thornton would be forced to dismiss the charges against Kevin Randall due to insufficient evidence. They had the forensic evidence, blood spatter analysis, DNA under Jennifer's fingernails, fibers from Randall's clothing found at the scene. They had Jennifer's testimony, but defense attorney Marcus Webb had already shredded her credibility on the stand, painting her as an unreliable witness with a history of mental health struggles and prescription medication use. What they needed was Emma, the only untainted witness, the only person who'd seen everything from beginning to end. Robert ran his hand through his salt and pepper hair, feeling every one of his 52 years weighing on his shoulders. This case had consumed him. Kevin Randall wasn't just another defendant. He was a monster who'd terrorized 3 women before Jennifer, but those victims had been too afraid to testify. This time, Robert had sworn, would be different. This time, justice would prevail. But how could it prevail when their star witness couldn't speak? Inside the courtroom, Marcus Webb was already savoring his victory. The 60-year-old defense attorney had built his reputation on getting guilty men acquitted, and he was damn good at it. He defended rapists, murderers, and monsters, convincing juries that black was white and up was down. Kevin Randall would be his easiest case yet. Without the child's testimony, the prosecution's case was circumstantial at best. Sure, his client had a temper. Sure, he'd been at Jennifer's apartment that night. But consensual relationships sometimes turned violent, didn't they? Jennifer could have attacked Kevin first. Self-defense was a beautiful thing. Webb smiled as he organized his files, already planning where he'd celebrate tonight. Kevin Randall would walk free, and Webb's bank account would grow by another $100,000. Justice, he'd learned long ago, was just a word lawyers used to manipulate juries. Back in the preparation room, Victim Advocate Coordinator James Rodriguez entered quietly, carrying a folder thick with psychological evaluations and expert testimonies. James had worked with traumatized children for 15 years, but Emma's case haunted him. He'd tried everything: play therapy, art therapy, even EMDR, but the child remained locked in her silent prison. "Detective Mills," James said softly, gesturing for Sarah to step into the hallway. Patricia stayed with Emma, humming a lullaby that the little girl showed no signs of hearing. Outside, James opened his folder with trembling hands. "I have one more idea," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's unconventional. Some might say it's crazy. But I've been reading studies from California, Washington, and New York. They're using facility dogs in courtrooms to help traumatized witnesses, especially children." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "A dog? You want to bring a dog into Judge Thornton's courtroom?" "Not just any dog," James insisted, pulling out research papers and success stories. "Trained therapy dogs specifically certified for courthouse work. There's one here in Monroe County, a golden retriever named Rex. He works with Officer Michael Chen. The studies show that children who can't communicate with adults will sometimes open up to animals. Dogs don't judge. They don't ask scary questions. They just listen." Sarah looked back through the small window in the door. Emma sat motionless, disappearing further into herself with each passing minute. What did they have to lose? "Set up a meeting," Sarah said firmly. "I'll talk to Judge Thornton. We have 48 hours to save this case and that little girl's voice. If a dog can do what we can't, then let's bring in the damn dog." James nodded, already pulling out his phone to make the call that would change everything. Inside the preparation room, Emma stared at the wall, seeing nothing but the memories that played on an endless loop behind her eyes. The screaming, the blood, the bad man's face twisted with rage, the sound of her mother's body hitting the floor. In 2 days, Emma would either find her voice, or a monster would walk free. The clock on the wall ticked forward, each second bringing them closer to a moment that would define not just this case, but the future of justice itself. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse parking lot as Officer Michael Chen opened the back door of his patrol car. A flash of golden fur emerged, followed by a dignified snout and a pair of intelligent brown eyes that seemed to understand far more than any dog should. Rex stepped onto the pavement with the grace of an animal who knew his purpose in this world, his tail swaying gently in the crisp autumn air. "Easy, boy," Michael said softly, though he knew Rex didn't need the reminder. In the 3 years they'd worked together, Rex had never once broken protocol. The golden retriever was more than a pet, more than a partner. He was a bridge between broken souls and healing, between silence and truth. Michael had been a K-9 officer for 12 years before transitioning to the courthouse facility dog program. He'd worked with German shepherds trained to sniff out drugs and explosives, powerful animals bred for aggression and detection. But Rex was different. Rex had been specially selected as a puppy for his calm temperament, his intuitive understanding of human emotion, and his seemingly supernatural ability to sense trauma. The dog had undergone 2 years of intensive training, learning to remain still for hours, to ignore distractions, to recognize signs of distress in humans, and most importantly, to provide comfort without being intrusive. As they approached the courthouse entrance, Michael felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. James Rodriguez had called him late last night, his voice urgent and desperate. A 3-year-old girl, traumatic mutism, a monster who might walk free. Could Rex help? Michael never promised miracles. He'd seen Rex work wonders with traumatized children, domestic violence survivors, and elderly witnesses terrified of testifying. But he'd also seen cases where even Rex's gentle presence wasn't enough to break through the walls of trauma. Every case was different. Every human heart carried its own unique scars. Inside the courthouse, Judge Margaret Thornton sat in her chambers, reading the request that James Rodriguez had submitted at 6 o'clock that morning. A facility dog, in her courtroom, during testimony. The judge removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, feeling the migraine that had been threatening all morning finally beginning to bloom. Margaret Thornton had presided over Monroe County Court for 18 years. She'd seen every legal maneuver, every desperate plea, every unconventional request imaginable. But this was new territory. She was a woman of law, of precedent, of established procedure. Dogs belonged in parks and homes, not in courtrooms where the scales of justice hung in delicate balance. Yet she couldn't stop thinking about Emma Carter. Margaret had briefly seen the child 2 weeks ago during a preliminary hearing. The little girl had been a ghost, present in body but absent in every way that mattered. Margaret had 3 grandchildren of her own. She'd watched them grow from babbling infants into rambunctious, chatty children who never stopped asking questions. The silence of a 3-year-old was unnatural, wrong, a perversion of childhood that spoke to horrors Margaret didn't want to imagine. A knock on her chamber door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Detective Sarah Mills entered, followed by James Rodriguez. Both looked like they hadn't slept in days. "Your Honor," Sarah began, "I know this is highly irregular." "Irregular?" Margaret interrupted, her voice sharp with exhaustion. "Detective, in 30 years of legal practice, I've never once approved an animal in my courtroom during testimony. Do you understand the precedent this could set, the appeals this could generate? Defense attorneys across the state will scream about prejudice, about jury manipulation, about—" "A child's voice," James cut in quietly. Both women turned to look at him. "With respect, Your Honor, we're not talking about setting precedent. We're talking about giving a traumatized 3-year-old a chance to feel safe enough to speak. That's all, just a chance." Margaret's jaw tightened. She looked down at the research James had submitted, study after study showing the effectiveness of facility dogs in helping traumatized witnesses testify. The data was compelling. Children who couldn't speak to therapists, police officers, or prosecutors would sometimes open up to a dog. Something about the non-judgmental presence, the soft fur, the steady heartbeat, it created a safe space where words could finally emerge. "One meeting," Margaret finally said. "Bring the dog to meet the child. If, and this is a significant if, the child shows positive response, I'll consider allowing the dog in the courtroom under strict conditions. The dog must be positioned where the jury cannot see it directly. No cute tricks, no theatrical displays. Understood?" Sarah and James nodded in unison, relief flooding their faces. "And gentlemen," Margaret added as they turned to leave, "if this backfires, if this gives Marcus Webb grounds for appeal and Kevin Randall walks free on a technicality, I will hold you both personally responsible." 20 minutes later, Rex padded down the courthouse hallway, his nails clicking softly against the polished floor. Michael kept the leash loose, allowing Rex to move at his own pace. The dog's training kicked in immediately. He ignored the lawyers rushing past, the ringing phones, the general chaos of courthouse business. His focus narrowed to a single door at the end of the hall. Inside the witness preparation room, Patricia Carter was singing softly to Emma, the same lullaby she'd sung to Jennifer when her daughter was a baby. Emma sat motionless, the one-eyed rabbit clutched against her chest, her gaze fixed on some invisible point in the distance. Sarah opened the door quietly, gesturing for Michael and Rex to enter. "Patricia, Emma, this is Officer Chen and his partner Rex. We hoped Emma might like to meet a very special friend." Patricia looked up, confused, then saw the golden retriever. Her eyes widened. "A dog you brought, eh?" But she never finished the sentence. Because something miraculous was happening. Emma's head had turned. For the first time in 6 months, the child's vacant stare had shifted, focused, locked onto something real in the present moment. Her blue eyes, so empty just seconds before, flickered with something that looked almost like recognition. Rex stood perfectly still in the doorway, his brown eyes meeting Emma's blue ones. The dog didn't approach, didn't wag his tail, didn't make any sudden movements. He simply stood there, radiating calm and safety, waiting. Emma's fingers loosened slightly on the rabbit. Her lips parted. No words came out, but her chest rose and fell with a deeper breath than anyone had seen her take in months. Michael caught James's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. This was it, the first crack in the wall, not much but enough. "Rex," Michael said softly, "go say hello." The golden retriever moved forward with deliberate slowness, each step measured and gentle. He approached Emma's chair, stopped just within reach, and sat down. Then he did something he'd done 1,000 times before with 1,000 different traumatized souls. He simply waited. Patient, peaceful, present. Emma stared at the dog for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly, so slowly that everyone in the room held their breath, her small hand extended. Her fingers, still clutching the rabbit in one hand, reached out with the other toward Rex's golden head. The moment her hand touched his fur, Emma's shoulders relaxed for the first time in 6 months. And in that touch, everyone in the room felt it, the first fragile thread of hope being woven into existence. Patricia Carter covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Sarah Mills blinked rapidly, refusing to let her own tears fall. James Rodriguez pulled out his phone and texted Judge Thornton. She touched him. "It's working." And Michael Chen, who'd seen this miracle happen before but never grew tired of witnessing it, simply smiled as Rex did what Rex did best: loved without condition, healed without words, and promised safety to a child who'd forgotten what safety felt like. Outside the room, Assistant District Attorney Robert Fitzgerald paused in the hallway, his phone buzzing with James's message. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel something he'd almost abandoned: hope. Day one began with silence, but it was a different kind of silence, not the hollow emptiness that had haunted Emma for 6 months, but rather a silence filled with possibility. Rex lay beside Emma's chair in the preparation room, his head resting on his paws, his eyes half closed in a picture of perfect patience. The little girl sat cross-legged on the floor now, having slid down from the chair sometime during the past hour. Her rabbit sat abandoned on the chair cushion, the first time she'd voluntarily set it down since the attack. Dr. Lisa Warren, the child psychologist who'd been working with Emma since the beginning, watched through the two-way mirror with barely contained excitement. In 6 months of intensive therapy, Emma had made minimal progress. She'd participated in play therapy sessions like a robot, moving pieces around without engagement, drawing pictures that were nothing but violent scribbles of red and black. She'd never once made eye contact, never once responded to questions, never once shown any sign that she was still present inside her traumatized body. But now Emma was leaning against Rex's warm body, her small hand resting on his ribcage, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. It wasn't talking, not yet, but it was connection. And connection was the first step toward healing. "She's mirroring his breathing pattern," Dr. Warren whispered to Sarah Mills, who stood beside her. "See, her chest is rising and falling in sync with his. She's regulating her nervous system through his calm presence. This is remarkable." Michael Chen sat quietly in the corner of the room, a book open on his lap but his eyes fixed on Rex. He knew his partner's signals better than anyone. The slight twitch of Rex's ear meant he'd heard something. The gentle shift of his weight meant he was adjusting to make Emma more comfortable. The soft sigh that just escaped his nose meant he was settling in for the long haul. Rex knew this child needed time, and time was something the dog had infinite patience for. Patricia Carter had gone home for the first time in 3 days, finally convinced by Sarah that Emma was in good hands. The grandmother needed rest, needed to see her daughter Jennifer at the hospital, needed to pretend for just a few hours that her world hadn't been shattered. But before she'd left, she'd kissed Emma's forehead and whispered, "Grandma will be back soon, baby girl. You're safe with Rex." Emma hadn't responded, but she hadn't pulled away from the kiss either. Day 2 arrived with autumn rain drumming against the courthouse windows. Emma came to the preparation room dressed in purple overalls and a yellow shirt, colors her grandmother had chosen deliberately, hopping to coax some brightness into the child's gray world. This time when Rex entered the room, something extraordinary happened. Emma smiled. It was barely there, just the faintest upward curve at the corners of her mouth, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. But James Rodriguez saw it, and he immediately grabbed his phone to document the moment in his notes. Every tiny breakthrough mattered. Every crack in the wall of trauma was a victory. "Good morning, Emma," Michael said softly as Rex approached the child. "Rex missed you yesterday afternoon. He kept looking at the door, wondering when you'd come back." Emma's eyes flicked to Michael's face. The first time she'd made eye contact with an adult since the attack. It lasted only a second before her gaze returned to Rex, but it was something. Progress measured in heartbeats and glances, but progress nonetheless. Rex settled beside Emma in what had become their spot on the floor. The child immediately pressed herself against his side, her fingers tangling in his golden fur. For an hour, they sat like that, girl and dog, both silent, both simply existing together in a space where words weren't necessary. Then at 10:47 a.m. it happened. Emma's lips moved. Dr. Warren leaned forward, her hand pressed against the mirror. Michael remained perfectly still, not wanting to break the spell. Even Rex seemed to sense the importance of this moment, his body going absolutely motionless except for his breathing. "Good doggy," Emma whispered into Rex's fur. The words were so soft that if the room hadn't been equipped with sensitive audio equipment, no one would have heard them. But they were there, real, spoken. After 6 months of silence, Emma Carter had found her voice again. Sarah Mills felt tears streaming down her face and didn't bother to wipe them away. James Rodriguez's hands trembled as he typed notes into his tablet. And Michael Chen, who trained for years to remain professionally detached, felt his own eyes burning with emotion. But they all knew better than to react. Any sudden movement, any excited exclamation, could frighten Emma back into silence. So they simply watched and waited, hopping for more. They didn't have to wait long. "Soft," Emma murmured, her fingers stroking Rex's ears. "Nice doggy, safe." That last word, safe, hit everyone in the observation room like a physical blow. This child, who'd witnessed violence that would haunt grown adults, who'd spent 6 months locked in terrorized silence, was finally beginning to feel safe again. And it was a dog who'd given her that gift. Dr. Warren carefully entered the preparation room, moving slowly and keeping her voice gentle. "Emma, sweetie, I'm so happy Rex makes you feel safe. Can you tell Rex what you're feeling?" Emma buried her face deeper into Rex's fur, but she didn't stop talking. The words came in fragments, disjointed and simple, but they came. "Scared before. Bad dreams. The bad man. Mommy cried. So much red." Dr. Warren's professional training kicked in. She sat down on the floor several feet away, giving Emma space. "You can tell Rex anything, Emma. He's a very good listener. He won't let anyone hurt you." "Rex is good," Emma whispered. "Not like the bad man. Rex won't yell. Rex won't hurt Mommy." The child continued whispering to the dog, sharing secrets she'd kept locked inside for half a year. She told Rex about hiding behind the couch, about being so scared she couldn't breathe, about the terrible sounds and the worse silence that came after. Rex listened to it all, his steady presence an anchor in Emma's storm of traumatic memories. By the time Patricia returned that afternoon, Emma had spoken 43 words, all of them to Rex. Meanwhile, across town in his expensive downtown office, defense attorney Marcus Webb was receiving troubling news from his private investigator. "They've brought in some kind of therapy dog," the investigator reported. "The kid's starting to talk." Webb's jaw clenched. He'd been so certain this case was won. Without the child's testimony, Randall would walk and Webb would collect his fee. But a talking witness changed everything. "File a motion," Webb snapped. "Emotional manipulation, prejudicial conduct, improper witness preparation. I don't care what grounds you use. That dog doesn't set foot in my courtroom." His paralegal nodded and hurried out. Webb turned to his window, looking out over the city. He'd built his reputation on getting guilty men acquitted. He wasn't about to let a golden retriever ruin his record. Day 3 arrived with unexpected sunshine, as if the weather itself was celebrating Emma's breakthrough. The child now greeted Rex with a hug, her small arms wrapping around his neck. She talked to him constantly, still not ready to speak to the adults in the room, but opening up more with each passing hour. "The bad man's name was Kevin," she told Rex that morning. "He had scary eyes. He grabbed Mommy's hair. I wanted to help, but I was too little." Dr. Warren exchanged glances with Sarah through the mirror. Emma was ready. Not ready to testify in court, not yet, but ready to begin the process of translating her words from dog to human. "Emma," Dr. Warren said gently, "Rex told me he thinks you're very brave. He wants to help you tell your story to other people too. Would that be okay?" Emma looked up, her blue eyes finally showing clarity instead of emptiness. She considered the question seriously, her hand still resting on Rex's head. "Will Rex stay with me?" she asked, the first time she directly addressed a human in 6 months. "Yes," Michael promised. "Rex stays with you always." Emma nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll try." Outside the courthouse, news vans were gathering. Word had leaked about the unprecedented use of a facility dog in a criminal trial. Legal experts debated on television about the implications. Civil rights advocates questioned whether it was fair to the defendant. But inside the preparation room, none of that mattered. What mattered was a little girl who'd found her voice again, and a dog who'd taught her that speaking truth didn't have to be scary when you had someone safe beside you. Judge Thornton's preliminary ruling came that afternoon. Rex would be allowed in the courtroom under strict conditions. The trial would proceed in 3 days. The countdown to justice had begun. October 17th dawned cold and gray, the kind of morning where autumn reminded everyone that winter was waiting just around the corner. Inside the Monroe County Courthouse, the air crackled with an electric tension that seemed to seep into every corner, every hallway, every whispered conversation. Today was the day that would determine whether justice prevailed or whether a monster walked free. Assistant District Attorney Robert Fitzgerald arrived at 6 a.m., 2 hours before anyone else. He'd barely slept, running through his questioning strategy over and over in his mind. Everything hinged on Emma. If she could speak in court the way she'd been speaking to Rex over the past 3 days, they had a chance. If her trauma locked her voice away again under the pressure of the courtroom, Kevin Randall would be acquitted before lunch. Robert spread his files across the prosecution table, his hands trembling slightly as he organized photographs, forensic reports, and medical records. Jennifer Carter's injuries had been catastrophic: fractured skull, broken ribs, internal bleeding, trauma that would leave physical and psychological scars for the rest of her life. But defense attorney Marcus Webb had already poisoned the jury pool with suggestions that Jennifer had been the aggressor, that Kevin had merely defended himself, that the evidence was circumstantial at best. By 8 a.m., the courthouse steps were crowded with news crews. CNN, Fox, local stations. They'd all descended on Monroe County like vultures sensing a story. "Historic case," the reporters called it. "Unprecedented use of therapy animal in criminal testimony." Legal experts argued on morning shows about whether allowing a dog in the courtroom constituted prejudice against the defendant. Civil liberties organizations had filed amicus briefs. The case had become a lightning rod for debates about justice, trauma, and the rights of the accused versus the rights of victims. But inside Courtroom 3B, none of the media circus mattered. What mattered was a 3-year-old girl and the truth she carried. Marcus Webb arrived at 8:30, his $1,000 suit pressed to perfection, his silver hair styled with the kind of precision that spoke to vanity and wealth. At 60 years old, he perfected the art of courtroom manipulation, how to plant doubt with a raised eyebrow, how to discredit witnesses with a careful tone, how to make juries see reasonable doubt where none existed. He'd won 43 cases in a row, and he had no intention of breaking that streak today. Kevin Randall sat at the defense table, his own expensive suit hiding the violent man beneath. At 34, he was handsome in a dangerous way, sharp features, cold blue eyes, the kind of smile that charmed initially but revealed cruelty upon closer inspection. He'd terrorized 3 women before Jennifer, but those victims had been too afraid to testify. Fear was Kevin's greatest weapon, and he wielded it expertly. This morning, Kevin radiated confidence. A 3-year-old witness, please. Children were unreliable, their memories easily manipulated, their testimonies often dismissed. Even if the brat managed to speak, Webb would shred her credibility on cross-examination. Kevin adjusted his tie and smirked at the prosecutor's table. By tonight, he'd be free. Judge Margaret Thornton entered her courtroom at 9 a.m. sharp, her black robes flowing behind her like wings of justice. She surveyed the packed gallery, every seat filled, people standing in the back, the air thick with anticipation. In her 18 years on the bench, she'd never presided over a case that garnered this much attention. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and the room erupted with the sound of shuffling feet and rustling clothing. Margaret took her seat, her sharp eyes sweeping the courtroom. She'd set strict rules about Rex's presence. The dog would enter through the side door, would be positioned beside the witness stand where the jury couldn't see him directly, and would remain absolutely still throughout Emma's testimony. Any disruption, any indication that the dog was influencing the jury's emotions rather than simply supporting the witness, and Margaret would remove the animal immediately. "Bring in the jury," she ordered. 12 men and women filed into the jury box, teachers, accountants, retirees, parents. They'd been selected carefully, screened for bias, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to witness. Several jurors glanced at the small witness stand that had been specially positioned for a child witness. A booster seat had been attached, and a microphone lowered to accommodate Emma's small stature. "The prosecution may call its next witness," Judge Thornton announced. Robert Fitzgerald stood, his voice steady despite the anxiety churning in his gut. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Emma Catherine Carter." The courtroom fell silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. Everyone's attention focused on the side door, waiting. Patricia Carter sat in the front row, her hands clasped in prayer. She dressed Emma that morning in the pink dress they'd chosen together, soft, comfortable, the color of hope. Patricia had braided Emma's blonde hair with trembling fingers, had kissed her granddaughter's forehead, and had whispered, "You're the bravest girl in the whole world. Rex will be right there with you. Grandma loves you so much." The side door opened. Officer Michael Chen appeared first, his uniform crisp, his expression professionally neutral. Beside him walked Rex, the golden retriever moving with quiet dignity, his brown eyes scanning the courtroom with calm assessment. And behind them, almost invisible in comparison, came Emma Carter. The little girl wore her pink dress and white shoes, her hair in neat braids, but her face was paperwhite with terror. Her small hand gripped Rex's collar so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Her eyes, those blue eyes that had been empty for so long, were now wide with fear, taking in the crowded courtroom, the high ceiling, the stern judge, and worst of all, the bad man sitting at the defense table. Kevin Randall, the monster from her nightmares. Emma stopped walking. Her legs locked. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, the beginning of a panic attack that Dr. Warren, watching from her seat behind the prosecution table, recognized immediately. "I can't," Emma whispered, so quietly only Rex and Michael heard her. "I can't, he's here. The bad man is here." Marcus Webb saw the child's terror and smiled. This was over before it began. He half rose from his seat, preparing to move for dismissal based on the witness's obvious inability to testify. But then something happened that would be replayed on news stations for months to come. Rex stopped walking and turned to face Emma. The dog didn't need commands from Michael. 3 years of training and an innate understanding of trauma told Rex exactly what to do. He pressed his warm body against Emma's trembling legs, creating a physical barrier between the child and her fear. Then he looked up at her with those impossibly gentle brown eyes, and in that gaze was a promise. "I'm here. You're safe. I won't let anything hurt you." Emma's hand released the death grip on his collar and moved to rest on his head. Her fingers tangled in his soft fur, the texture that had become her anchor over the past 3 days. She looked down at Rex, and the dog's steady presence seemed to transfer directly into her small body. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders lowered slightly. And when Rex began walking again toward the witness stand, Emma followed. Step by terrifying step, they crossed the courtroom together. The dog and the child, trauma and healing, terror and courage. When they reached the witness stand, Michael helped Emma climb onto the booster seat. Rex immediately positioned himself beside her, sitting in the exact spot they'd practiced, his body just out of the jury's direct line of sight but close enough for Emma to touch. Emma's hand immediately found his fur. Judge Thornton leaned forward. "Emma, can you hear me okay?" The child nodded, her eyes never leaving Rex's face. "You're very brave for being here today," Margaret said gently. "No one is going to hurt you. Do you understand?" Another nod. Robert Fitzgerald approached slowly, his entire career balanced on this moment. "Emma, I'm Mr. Fitzgerald. We've met before, remember. I'm going to ask you some questions and you can take your time answering them. Is that okay?" Emma looked at Rex. The dog's tail gave one gentle wag. "Okay," Emma whispered into the microphone, her voice barely audible even with amplification. In the gallery, Patricia Carter's tears fell silently. Sarah Mills gripped James Rodriguez's hand. Dr. Warren held her breath. And Kevin Randall's confident smirk began to fade as he realized that his greatest weapon, fear, had just been defeated by a golden retriever and a 3-year-old girl who'd found her courage. The testimony was about to begin. The courtroom held its collective breath as Assistant District Attorney Robert Fitzgerald stood before the witness stand, a careful distance from Emma that felt both respectful and strategic. He'd prosecuted hundreds of cases, questioned thousands of witnesses, but never had he felt the weight of justice pressing down quite like this. Everything, Jennifer's suffering, Patricia's heartbreak, the future safety of countless women Kevin Randall might victimize, everything rested on the next few minutes. "Emma," Robert began, his voice as soft as a father reading a bedtime story, "can you tell me your full name?" Silence. Emma's blue eyes remained fixed on Rex, her small fingers buried deep in his golden fur. The dog sat perfectly still, his presence radiating the calm steadiness of a lighthouse in a storm. But Emma's lips remained pressed together, sealed by trauma and terror. Robert tried again, adjusting his approach. "That's okay, sweetheart. Take your time. Can you tell me how old you are? Can you hold up your fingers to show me?" Nothing. The seconds stretched into a minute, then 2 minutes. The courtroom, which had been silent with anticipation, now became silent with growing concern. Jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The court reporter's fingers hovered motionless over her keys. Even the judge's expression began to show traces of worry. Marcus Webb remained seated at the defense table, but his posture screamed victory. He caught Kevin Randall's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. This testimony was dead in the water. 5 more minutes of this silence, and Webb would move to strike the witness, possibly even move for a directed verdict. The prosecution's case would collapse like a house of cards. Patricia Carter's hands trembled in her lap, her lips moving in silent prayer. "Please, baby, please speak. I know you're scared, but please." Dr. Lisa Warren watched Emma's body language with clinical precision. The child was dissociating, retreating into the safe space inside her mind where the bad man couldn't reach her. Her breathing had become shallow again, her pupils slightly dilated. Emma was slipping away, returning to that silent prison she'd occupied for 6 months. Robert Fitzgerald felt panic rising in his chest. He'd been warned this might happen, that the stress of the courtroom, the presence of Kevin Randall, the eyes of strangers watching, it could all trigger Emma into silence again. But he'd hoped, prayed, believed that Rex's presence would be enough. Apparently, it wasn't. "Your Honor," Marcus Webb rose smoothly from his chair, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "It's clear that this child is unable to testify. While we all sympathize with whatever trauma she may have experienced, the prosecution cannot base their case on a witness who cannot speak. I move to—" "Sit down, counselor," Judge Thornton snapped, her eyes never leaving Emma. Something in Margaret's gut told her to wait, just wait. "Mr. Fitzgerald, you may continue." But Robert had run out of gentle questions. He looked at Dr. Warren, who gave him a subtle shake of her head. Pushing Emma right now would only traumatize her further. The prosecutor's shoulders sagged with defeat. Then Officer Michael Chen, who'd been standing quietly in the corner, did something that broke protocol but changed everything. He whispered, barely audible, "Rex, comfort." The dog's ears perked slightly. In their 3 years together, Michael had never given that command in a courtroom. But he'd seen something in Emma's face, a desperate plea that only Rex could answer. Rex shifted his position slightly, pressing his warm body more firmly against Emma's leg. Then he did something extraordinary. He lifted his head and rested it directly on Emma's lap, looking up at her with those impossibly gentle brown eyes. Emma's hand moved from his fur to his face, her small fingers tracing the soft outline of his muzzle. And in that moment, something cracked inside her. The wall she'd built to keep the terror out finally developed a fissure. She leaned down, her mouth close to Rex's ear, and whispered something that the microphone didn't catch. Robert Fitzgerald froze. "Your Honor, I couldn't hear." "Quiet," Judge Thornton commanded, leaning forward. "Emma, sweetheart, can you speak a little louder? I know it's scary, but we need to hear you." Emma shook her head, still whispering to Rex, her words lost to everyone else. Dr. Warren suddenly stood up from her seat. "Your Honor, may I approach?" Margaret waved her forward impatiently. Dr. Warren climbed the few steps to the witness stand and knelt beside Emma, her eyes level with the child's. She spoke quietly, just loud enough for Emma to hear. "Emma, remember what we practiced. Rex wants to hear your story, but Rex also wants everyone else to hear it too, so they can help keep you and your mommy safe. Can you tell Rex your story loud enough for everyone to hear? Rex will keep you safe while you talk. I promise." Emma's eyes, still fixed on the dog, filled with tears. "The bad man is here," she whispered to Rex, her voice finally loud enough for the microphone to catch. "He's looking at me." The courtroom erupted in a wave of emotion, gasps, murmurs, the scratch of pens as reporters frantically took notes. Judge Thornton's gavel came down hard. "Silence. Absolute silence in this courtroom, or I will clear the gallery." The room fell quiet again, but now it was different. Now everyone was straining to hear the small voice emerging from 6 months of silence. Robert Fitzgerald approached the witness stand again, every movement slow and deliberate. "Emma, Can you tell Rex what happened the night your mommy got hurt? Tell him everything you remember." For a moment, nothing. Then Emma's lips began to move, her words flowing not to the prosecutor, not to the judge, not to the jury, but to Rex, the only one she trusted with her terrible truth. "The bad man hurt Mommy," Emma said, her voice gaining strength with each word as Rex's steady presence anchored her to safety. "I was sleeping, but the yelling woke me up. Bad words, really bad words. Mommy was crying." Patricia Carter's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. Sarah Mills gripped the edge of her seat. Kevin Randall's face had gone pale. Emma continued, the words tumbling out now in a rush, as if speaking to Rex had opened a floodgate she couldn't close. "I got out of bed and I saw through the door. The bad man grabbed Mommy's hair. He pulled really hard. Mommy screamed." "Emma," Robert interjected gently, "can you point to the bad man? Is he in this courtroom?" Without lifting her eyes from Rex, Emma raised one small finger and pointed directly at Kevin Randall. "That's him. That's the bad man." The courtroom collectively gasped. Marcus Webb shot to his feet. "Objection," leading the witness, prejudicial language. "Overruled," Judge Thornton said firmly. "The child may continue in her own words." Emma's testimony poured out in heartbreaking detail. She described hiding behind the couch, too scared to move. She told Rex about the blue shirt, Mommy's favorite shirt, the one with flowers, and how it ripped when Kevin grabbed it. She described the lamp breaking, the terrible sound of flesh hitting flesh, the screaming that suddenly stopped and was somehow worse than the screaming itself. "There was so much red," Emma whispered to Rex, tears streaming down her cheeks now. "Red on the floor, red on Mommy's face, red everywhere, and the bad man said—" She paused, her small body shaking. "It's okay," Dr. Warren encouraged softly. "Rex is right here. What did the bad man say?" Emma's voice dropped to barely a whisper, but the microphone caught every word. "He said, 'I'll kill you. Nobody leaves me. Nobody.'" The words hung in the air like poison. Several jurors were openly crying now. Even the bailiff had to look away, his jaw clenched tight. Kevin Randall's confident demeanor had completely shattered. His face had turned ashen, his hands gripping the defense table so hard his knuckles were white. Marcus Webb was frantically taking notes, trying to find any angle, any opening for cross-examination, but even he looked shaken. Emma continued speaking to Rex, describing how her mother fell and didn't get up, how she'd wanted to help but was too little and too scared, how she'd hidden in the closet until the police came. Every detail matched the physical evidence perfectly. The torn clothing, the broken lamp, the specific words Kevin had shouted, even the timing of events. For 23 minutes, Emma Carter spoke directly to Rex, and through Rex to the courtroom to justice itself. And when she was finally finished, when the last terrible detail had been spoken aloud, she collapsed against the dog's warm body and sobbed, not the silent tears of trauma, but the healing tears of truth finally released. Robert Fitzgerald stood motionless, tears on his own cheeks. He had no more questions. Emma had given them everything they needed. Judge Thornton called for a 15-minute recess, her own voice thick with emotion. As the jury filed out, several members looked directly at Kevin Randall with expressions of disgust and rage. Marcus Webb approached the bench, his face grim. "Your Honor, I need to speak with my client." Because Webb knew, as everyone in that courtroom now knew, that Kevin Randall's confidence had been built on silence. And silence had just spoken louder than any defense attorney's argument ever could. The 15-minute recess felt like 15 hours. In a private consultation room, Marcus Webb sat across from Kevin Randall, watching his client's carefully constructed facade crumble like sand castles against a tsunami. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by panic that made Kevin's hands shake and his voice crack. "She's lying," Kevin insisted, but even he didn't sound convinced anymore. "She's 3 years old. 3-year-olds don't remember details like that. Someone coached her. They fed her those lines. Webb wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, because his reputation and his $100,000 fee depended on it. But he'd been practicing law for 35 years, and he knew the difference between coached testimony and genuine memory. Emma's account had been too raw, too detailed, too emotionally authentic to be fabricated. She described things no 3-year-old should know: the specific brutality of domestic violence, the terror of watching someone you love being destroyed. "I'll do what I can on cross-examination," Webb said, his voice flat and professional, already emotionally distancing himself from what he knew was a lost cause. "But Marcus, you need to understand something. That testimony was devastating. The jury believed every word. I saw their faces." Kevin slammed his fist on the table. "I'm paying you to win. Find a way to discredit her. She's a child. Make the jury see she's unreliable." Webb stared at his client, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as a defendant to be defended, not as a paycheck to be earned, but as exactly what Emma had called him: the bad man, the monster. And for once in his long career of defending monsters, Marcus Webb felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel: shame. "I'll do my job," he said quietly, "but prepare yourself for the possibility that—" "Don't," Kevin cut him off. "Don't you dare say it." Back in the courtroom, Emma remained on the witness stand with Rex pressed against her side. Dr. Warren had stayed close, offering the child water and quiet reassurance. Emma's face was tear-stained but calmer now, as if speaking the truth had lanced a festering wound. Patricia Carter had been allowed to move to a seat directly in Emma's line of sight, where her grandmother could offer silent support and love. Officer Michael Chen had never been more proud of Rex. The dog had remained absolutely motionless throughout Emma's testimony, his only movement the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Rex hadn't been trained to heal trauma. That was beyond any dog's ability, but he'd been trained to create a safe space where healing could begin. And in that, he'd succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Judge Margaret Thornton returned to the bench, her expression carved from granite. She'd presided over hundreds of cases involving violence, abuse, and human cruelty, but Emma's testimony had shaken even her professional detachment. She looked at the child on the witness stand, so small, so vulnerable, yet somehow possessed of a courage that put most adults to shame. "Mr. Webb," Judge Thornton said, her voice controlled but edged with warning, "you may cross-examine the witness, but let me be absolutely clear. I will not tolerate any tactics designed to traumatize this child further. Your questions will be respectful and appropriate, or I will hold you in contempt. Do you understand?" Webb stood, adjusting his tie, scrambling for a strategy that felt increasingly futile. "Yes, Your Honor." He approached the witness stand slowly, his usual courtroom swagger noticeably absent. Emma's hand tightened on Rex's fur, her body tensing in anticipation of attack. She'd been warned that the bad man's lawyer would ask her questions, that he might try to confuse her or make her doubt herself. "Emma," Webb began, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. He was smart enough to know that aggression would backfire spectacularly with this jury. "You love your mommy very much, don't you?" Emma nodded, her eyes wary. "And you'd do anything to protect her, right? To make sure she doesn't get hurt again?" "Objection," Robert Fitzgerald called out. "Counsel is leading the witness and implying she's fabricating testimony." "Sustained," Judge Thornton ruled sharply. "Rephrase, Mr. Webb, or move on." Webb tried another angle. "Emma, it was nighttime when this happened, correct? And you said you were sleeping, so it was dark, wasn't it?" "There was a light," Emma said to Rex, not to Webb. "The kitchen light. Mommy always leaves it on." "But you were behind the couch hiding, and you were scared. Sometimes when we're scared, our minds play tricks on us. We see things that aren't really." "I saw him." Emma's voice rose, louder than before, filled with a certainty that cut through Webb's implications like a knife. She turned her head slightly, not quite looking at Kevin but in his direction. "I saw the bad man hurt Mommy. I saw his face. I heard his voice. He said bad words and he said he would kill her, and he broke the lamp and Mommy's shirt ripped and there was blood and—" "Emma, sweetheart," Dr. Warren interrupted gently, seeing the child beginning to spiral into panic. "Take a breath. Rex is here. You're safe." Emma pressed her face into Rex's fur, her small body shaking. The jury watched with expressions ranging from sympathy to outright anger, but none of that anger was directed at the child. Several jurors were now glaring openly at Marcus Webb, as if he were complicit in Kevin's crimes simply by defending him. Webb knew he was losing them. Hell, he'd lost them the moment Emma pointed at Kevin and called him the bad man. But he had to try something, anything. His professional obligation demanded it, even as his conscience screamed at him to sit down. "Your Honor," Webb said, grasping at straws, "I'd like to question the witness about her medical history. Has she been on any medications? Has she received any therapy that might have influenced her memories of that night?" Judge Thornton's eyes flashed with barely contained fury. "Mr. Webb, are you seriously suggesting that therapy designed to help a traumatized child somehow manufactured false memories?" "I'm suggesting, Your Honor, that the defense has a right to explore all factors that might affect the reliability of—" "No," Emma's small voice cut through the legal sparring. Everyone turned to look at her. She was sitting up straighter now, her hands still on Rex but her posture showing something new, anger. "Nobody told me what to say. Nobody made me remember. I remember because it happened. The bad man hurt Mommy and I was there and I saw it and now I told everyone and he can't hurt us anymore." The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause. Judge Thornton's gavel came down repeatedly, calling for order, but even she looked like she wanted to applaud. Marcus Webb stood frozen, realizing he'd just made a catastrophic error. By pushing too hard, he'd given Emma the opportunity to declare her truth with even more conviction. Kevin Randall buried his face in his hands. Webb cleared his throat, his face flushed with embarrassment and defeat. "No further questions, Your Honor." As Webb returned to the defense table, Robert Fitzgerald stood for redirect examination. But he looked at Emma's exhausted face, at the way she was clinging to Rex like a lifeline, and made a decision. "The prosecution has no redirect, Your Honor. Emma has told us everything we need to know." Judge Thornton nodded approvingly. "The witness is excused. Emma, you've been incredibly brave today. Thank you for telling us the truth." Officer Chen helped Emma down from the witness stand. As she passed the defense table, she didn't look at Kevin Randall. She didn't need to. She'd already defeated him with the one weapon he couldn't fight, the truth. Patricia Carter met her granddaughter at the gate, sweeping her into an embrace that spoke of love, relief, and fierce protection. As they walked toward the exit, Rex padding alongside them, Emma whispered to her grandmother, "Is it over now? Is Mommy safe?" Patricia kissed her granddaughter's forehead, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Yes, baby girl, it's over. You saved Mommy. You're a hero." But Emma shook her head, looking down at Rex. "Not me, Grandma. Rex is the hero. He helped me be brave." As they disappeared through the courthouse doors, the jury was left with an image they'd never forget. A 3-year-old girl who'd faced her monster and spoken truth to power, supported by a golden dog who'd given her the courage to break her silence. The defense rested without calling a single witness. Everyone knew what the verdict would be. The jury deliberation room on the 3rd floor of Monroe County Courthouse was silent except for the ticking of an old wall clock and the rustle of evidence photographs being passed between 12 hands. Juror number 7, a 52-year-old high school teacher named Margaret Chen, stared at the images of Jennifer Carter's injuries. The fractured skull, the bruises that mapped violence across her skin like a horrific atlas, the blood-soaked carpet where she'd nearly died. "Does anyone here have any doubt?" asked the foreman, Robert Sullivan, a retired postal worker who'd served on 3 juries before but never one that had affected him quite like this. Any doubt at all about what we witnessed today?" Silence answered him. 11 heads shook in unison. Juror number 3, a young mother named Lisa Rodriguez who had a daughter Emma's age, wiped tears from her eyes. That baby looked him in the eye and called him the bad man. She described everything. Every detail matched the evidence. How could there be doubt? The defense attorney tried to suggest her memory was unreliable, Juror number 9 pointed out, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it himself. "That was desperation," Margaret Chen responded firmly. "I've taught children for 30 years. I know when they're telling the truth. That little girl wasn't coached. She was traumatized. There's a difference." Robert Sullivan looked around the table. "Then let's vote. All in favor of guilty on count 1, aggravated assault." 12 hands rose simultaneously. Count 2, domestic battery. 12 hands. Count 3, witness intimidation. 12 hands. The fastest unanimous verdict in Monroe County history had been reached in exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes. Back in the courthouse hallway, Patricia Carter sat on a wooden bench with Emma curled in her lap, the child finally sleeping after the emotional exhaustion of testimony. Rex lay at their feet, his head resting on his paws, ever vigilant even in rest. Officer Michael Chen stood nearby, giving them space but remaining close enough to provide security. Detective Sarah Mills approached quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a juice box. "Any word yet?" Patricia whispered. "Not yet, but it won't be long." Sarah handed Patricia the coffee and set the juice box aside for when Emma woke. "How is she?" Patricia looked down at her granddaughter's peaceful face, so different from the terror-stricken child of 6 months ago. "She's strong, stronger than any of us knew." Her voice cracked with emotion. "My baby girl spoke today, Sarah. After 6 months of silence, she spoke. She saved her mother. She saved herself." Sarah Mills, who'd built walls around her heart during 23 years of witnessing humanity's worst, felt those walls crumble. "She saved more than that, Patricia. What Emma did today, it's going to change things. Other children will see her courage. Other jurisdictions will see what Rex made possible. This case will be cited for years." Inside the courtroom, Assistant District Attorney Robert Fitzgerald sat alone at the prosecution table, his hands clasped in something resembling prayer. He'd gambled everything on a traumatized child and a golden retriever, and for the past 2 hours, he'd been second-guessing every decision that led to this moment. What if the jury thought Emma was too young to be reliable? What if Marcus Webb's cross-examination had planted seeds of doubt? The bailiff's radio crackled. "Jury's coming back." Robert's heart hammered against his ribs. Too fast. Was that good or bad? Quick verdicts could mean overwhelming guilt or overwhelming doubt. He stood on shaking legs as the courtroom began to fill, reporters rushing back to their seats, spectators crowding the gallery, Judge Thornton returning to the bench with an expression that revealed nothing. Kevin Randall entered through the side door, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. His expensive suit couldn't hide the fear that radiated from him now. Marcus Webb walked beside his client, his face professionally neutral but his eyes showing resignation. He'd been in this business long enough to read a jury, and he'd seen their faces when they'd filed out for deliberation. This was over. Patricia Carter had been notified and now sat in the front row, Emma still sleeping against her shoulder. She'd refused to wake the child. Emma had done her part. She'd been brave enough for a lifetime. Now it was time for the adults to finish what she'd started. All rise for the jury. 12 men and women filed into the jury box, none of them looking at the defense table. That was the tell. Defense attorneys knew that when jurors avoided looking at the defendant, conviction was coming. Judge Margaret Thornton's voice cut through the tension. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Robert Sullivan stood, holding a piece of paper that would determine the next 15 years of Kevin Randall's life, and potentially the safety of countless women he might have victimized in the future. "We have, Your Honor." On count 1, Aggravated assault, how do you find? We find the defendant, Kevin Michael Randall, guilty. Patricia Carter's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob of relief. On count 2, domestic battery, how do you find? Guilty. On count 3, witness intimidation, how do you find? Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom like a bell tolling for justice. Kevin Randall's head dropped to the defense table. Marcus Webb closed his files with quiet finality. And in the gallery, Detective Sarah Mills closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Judge Thornton's gavel came down. Mr. Randall, you have been found guilty on all counts. Sentencing will be held 1 week from today. Until then, you are remanded to county jail without bail. Bailiff, remove the defendant. As Kevin Randall was led away in handcuffs, he made the mistake of looking back at the gallery one final time. His eyes met Patricia Carter's, and what he saw there made him flinch. Not hatred, not triumph, but something far more powerful. A grandmother's fierce love and a promise that he would never hurt her family again. 3 days later, Monroe County Courthouse was again packed for sentencing. Jennifer Carter, still healing but determined to face her attacker one final time, sat in a wheelchair beside her mother. Emma stayed home with a trusted babysitter. She'd done enough. She'd been brave enough. Now it was her mother's turn. Judge Thornton reviewed the presentence investigation, the victim impact statements, and the defendant's complete lack of remorse. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of justice itself. Mr. Randall, you terrorized a woman in her own home. You traumatized a child who will carry the scars of what she witnessed for the rest of her life. You showed no mercy, no remorse, no recognition of the humanity you nearly destroyed. Therefore, this court will show you the same consideration you showed your victims. She paused, letting the words sink in. On count 1, aggravated assault, I sentence you to 8 years in state prison. On count 2, domestic battery, 5 years to run consecutively. On count 3, witness intimidation, 2 years to run consecutively. Total sentence, 15 years with no possibility of parole for 10 years. Jennifer Carter wept as her mother held her hand. 15 years. Her daughter would be 18 before Kevin Randall walked free. Emma would grow up safe, protected, able to heal without the shadow of her attacker looming over her childhood. Outside the courthouse, a press conference had been hastily organized. Patricia Carter stood at the podium, her weathered face lined with exhaustion but glowing with relief. Reporters shouted questions, but she raised her hand for silence. My granddaughter is 3 years old, Patricia began, her voice strong despite the tears flowing down her cheeks. 6 months ago, a monster stole her voice. She watched her mother nearly die, and the trauma locked her words away. We thought we'd lost her forever. She paused, composing herself. Then a dog named Rex came into our lives. That beautiful, gentle dog didn't just help Emma testify. He gave her back her voice. He gave her back her childhood. He gave our family justice. And I hope, I pray, that other communities see what happened here and bring facility dogs into their courtrooms too. Because if Emma's courage can help even one other child speak their truth, then everything she went through will have meaning beyond our family's pain. The story exploded across national news. CNN ran a segment titled "The Dog Who Unlocked Justice." The Washington Post published a feature about facility dogs in courtrooms. Legal scholars debated the precedent on NPR. And in living rooms across America, parents hugged their children a little tighter, grateful for heroes who came in unexpected forms. Judge Margaret Thornton received calls from judges in 17 states, all asking how to implement facility dog programs in their jurisdictions. She became an unlikely advocate, testifying before state legislatures, writing law review articles, championing the cause of giving traumatized witnesses the support they needed to speak truth to power. And Emma went home to heal. 6 months after the trial, Emma Carter celebrated her 4th birthday in the backyard of her grandmother's house. surrounded by balloons, cake, and the kind of laughter that only children possess when they've forgotten what it means to be afraid. The autumn sun cast golden light across the party, and Emma, wearing a yellow dress with daisies, ran through fallen leaves with an energy that made Patricia Carter's heart swell with gratitude. "He's here, he's here!" Emma shrieked with delight as Officer Michael Chen's patrol car pulled into the driveway. The back door opened, and Rex bounded out, his golden fur gleaming in the sunlight, his tail wagging with the pure joy that only dogs seem to master. Emma crashed into him with the full force of her small body, wrapping her arms around his neck while Rex stood perfectly still, accepting the embrace with patient grace. "Happy birthday, Emma," Michael said, carrying a wrapped present that was clearly dog-shaped. "Rex wanted to make sure he didn't miss your party." Emma's eyes went wide. "Is that for me?" "Open it and see." Inside the wrapping paper was a stuffed golden retriever, remarkably similar to Rex, soft and huggable. Emma clutched it to her chest immediately, but not before giving the real Rex another fierce hug. "Thank you. I'm going to name him Rex Jr." The backyard filled with the chaos of childhood celebration. Emma's new friends from preschool playing games, eating cake, and treating Rex like the celebrity he'd become. The dog handled the attention with characteristic calm, allowing children to pet him, pose for pictures with him, and tell him secrets that only dogs were privileged to hear. Patricia Carter stood on the porch with Detective Sarah Mills, both women watching Emma with emotions too complex for words. "Look at her," Patricia whispered. "6 months ago, I didn't think we'd ever see her smile again." Sarah nodded, remembering the hollow-eyed child who'd sat silent in the courthouse preparation room. "She's remarkable. They all are, the children Rex has helped since Emma's case." It was true. In the 6 months since Emma's testimony had captivated the nation, Rex had become the most famous courthouse facility dog in America. Officer Chen had received requests from prosecutors in 14 states, all asking if Rex could help with their traumatized child witnesses. While Rex couldn't travel to them all, his success had inspired a nationwide movement. Monroe County had expanded its program to include 3 more facility dogs. California had implemented mandatory facility dog programs in all counties with populations over 500,000. New York had allocated funding for training 20 new courthouse therapy dogs, and Washington State had passed legislation requiring all courtrooms to accommodate facility animals for vulnerable witnesses. Emma's case had been cited in 17 legal briefs, 3 appeals court decisions, and countless law review articles. Carter v. Randall had become shorthand in legal circles for the intersection of trauma-informed justice and innovative courtroom accommodations. But for Emma, none of that mattered. She didn't understand legal precedent or nationwide policy changes. She only knew that the bad man was gone, her mommy was safe, and Rex had helped her be brave when bravery seemed impossible. Jennifer Carter emerged from the house, still moving carefully. The injuries from that terrible night had healed physically, but phantom pains lingered. She'd undergone months of physical therapy, reconstructive surgery on her cheekbone, and intensive counseling to address the PTSD that woke her with nightmares. But she was alive. She was here, and she was watching her daughter be a child again. "Thank you," Jennifer said quietly to Michael Chen, who'd stepped aside from the party to give the family space. "I know everyone's thanked you and Rex 1,000 times, but I need you to hear it from me. You gave me my daughter back. Not just her testimony. You gave me back her laughter, her voice, her childhood. How do you thank someone for that?" Michael smiled, watching Rex accept another enthusiastic hug from Emma. "You don't thank me. You thank him. I'm just the human who holds the leash. Rex is the one who does the real work." Jennifer knelt beside Rex, her eyes level with his. The dog looked at her with those impossibly wise brown eyes, and Jennifer felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're a good boy, Rex. The very best boy. You saved both of us." Rex's tail wagged slowly, and he leaned forward to gently lick Jennifer's cheek, a gesture of comfort, of recognition, of a bond formed through shared trauma and collective healing. Across town in her courthouse chambers, Judge Margaret Thornton was reading the morning newspaper. The headline read, "National Courthouse Dog Program RECIVES Federal Funding." The article detailed how Emma's case had inspired legislation providing grants for training and placing facility dogs in courtrooms nationwide. Margaret had testified before Congress 3 months ago, using Emma's story as evidence that justice sometimes required thinking outside traditional boundaries. Her phone rang. It was a judge from Oregon with questions about implementing their own program. Margaret answered patiently, explaining protocols, sharing research, advocating for the children who needed voices but couldn't find them without help. Later that day, she'd meet with a group of lawyers developing model legislation for facility dog accommodations. Tomorrow, she'd speak at a judicial conference about trauma-informed courtroom practices. Next week, she'd travel to Washington, D.C. to consult with the Justice Department. Emma's case had changed Margaret's career, shifted her perspective, and given her a mission beyond simply presiding over trials. She'd become an accidental activist, fighting to ensure that other traumatized children would have the same chance Emma had, the chance to speak truth without drowning in fear. Back at the birthday party, as the sun began to set and parents arrived to collect their children, Emma sat on the grass beside Rex, her new stuffed dog clutched in one arm while her other hand rested on Rex's real fur. "Rex," she said softly. The dog's ears perked. "My teacher says you're a hero. She says you help lots of kids like me." Rex's tail swayed gently. Emma leaned close, whispering into his fur the way she'd done that day in the courtroom. "I was so scared of the bad man, but you made me brave. You showed me that I could talk about the scary things and be okay." She pulled back, looking into Rex's brown eyes with the wisdom of a child who'd survived what no child should endure. "I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to help people who are scared. I want to make them brave too." Patricia Carter, overhearing this exchange, felt her heart break and mend simultaneously. Emma wasn't just surviving. She was transforming her trauma into purpose, her pain into promise. As the party ended and Michael prepared to leave with Rex, Emma insisted on walking them to the car. She gave Rex one final hug, pressing her face into his golden fur. "Thank you for being my friend," she whispered. "Thank you for helping me find my voice." Rex licked her cheek gently, his way of saying what dogs have always known but humans often forget. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to speak truth despite it. That healing comes not from forgetting trauma, but from finding safe spaces to finally remember it. And that sometimes, the greatest heroes don't wear capes or badges. Sometimes they wear fur and unconditional love. As Michael's car disappeared down the street, Emma turned to her grandmother and mother, her face glowing with the kind of peace that comes from surviving darkness and choosing light. "I'm going to be okay, Grandma," she said simply. "Rex taught me how." And Patricia Carter, pulling her granddaughter and daughter into an embrace, knew that Emma was right. They were all going to be okay, because one 3-year-old girl had found her voice, one golden dog had shown her the way, and one courtroom had proven that justice, when combined with compassion, could heal wounds that seemed impossible to mend. The bad man was gone. The silence was broken. And Emma Carter, brave, resilient, and impossibly strong, was finally truly free. The end.